A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf, Part 6. If only Mrs. Seton and her mother before her had learnt the great art of money-making and had left their money, like their fathers and their grandfathers before them, to found fellowships and lectureships and prizes and scholarships appropriated to the use of their own sex. We might have dined very tolerably up here alone off a bird and a bottle of wine. We might have looked forward without undue confidence to a pleasant and honourable lifetime spent in the shelter of one of the liberally endowed professions. We might have been exploring or writing, mooning about the venerable places of the earth, sitting contemplative on the steps of the Parthenon, or going at 10 to an office and coming home comfortably at 4:30 to write a little poetry. Only if Mrs. Seton and her like had gone into business at the age of 15, there would have been, that was the snag in the argument, no Mary. What, I asked, did Mary think of that? There between the curtains was the October night, calm and lovely with a star or two caught in the yellowing trees. Was she ready to resign her share of it and her memories, for they had been a happy family, though a large one, of games and quarrels up in Scotland, which she is never tired of praising, for the fineness of its air and the quality of its cakes, in order that Fernham might have been endowed with £50,000 or so by a stroke of the pen. For to endow a college would necessitate the suppression of families altogether. Making a fortune and bearing 13 children, no human being could stand it. Consider the facts, we said. First, there are 9 months before the baby is born. Then the baby is born. Then there are 3 or 4 months spent in feeding the baby. After the baby is fed, there are certainly 5 years spent in playing with the baby. You cannot, it seems, let children run about the streets. People who have seen them running wild in Russia say that the sight is not a pleasant one. People say, too, that human nature takes its shape in the years between 1 and 5. If Mrs. Seton, I said, had been making money, what sort of memories would have had of games and quarrels? What would you have known of Scotland, and its fine air and cakes and all the rest of it? But it is useless to ask these questions, because you would never have come into existence at all. Moreover, it is equally useless to ask what might have happened if Mrs. Seton and her mother before her, had amassed great wealth and laid it under the foundations of college and library, because, in the first place, to earn money was impossible for them, and in the second, had it been possible, the law denied them the right to possess what money they earned. It is only for the last 48 years that Mrs. Seton had had a penny of her own. For all the centuries before that it would have been her husband's property, a thought which perhaps may have had its share in keeping Mrs. Seton and her mother's off the stock exchange. Every penny I earn, they may have said, will be taken from me and disposed of according to my husband's wisdom, perhaps to found a scholarship or to endow a fellowship in Balliol or King's, so that to earn money, even if I could earn money, is not a matter that interests me greatly. I had better leave it to my husband. At any rate, whether or not the blame rested on the old lady who was looking at the spaniel, there could be no doubt that for some reason or other our mothers had mismanaged their affairs very gravely. Not a penny could be spared for amenities, for partridges and wine, beadles and turf, books and cigars, libraries and leisure. To raise bare walls out of bare earth was the utmost they could do. So we talked standing at the window and looking, as so many thousands look every night, down on the domes and towers of the famous city beneath us. It was very beautiful, very mysterious in the autumn moonlight. The old stone looked very white and venerable. One thought of all the books that were assembled down there, of the pictures of the old prelates and worthies hanging in the panelled rooms, of the painted windows that would be throwing strange globes and crescents on the pavement, of the tablets and memorials and inscriptions, of the fountains and the grass, of the quiet rooms looking across the quiet quadrangles, and, pardon me, I thought too of the admirable smoke and drink and deep armchairs and the pleasant carpets, of the urbanity, the geniality, the dignity which are the offspring of luxury and privacy and space. Certainly, our mothers had not provided us with anything comparable to all this. Our mothers who found it difficult to scrape together £30,000, our mothers who bore 13 children to ministers of religion at St. Andrews. So I went back to my inn, and as I walked through the dark streets, I pondered this and that as one does at the end of the day's work. I pondered why it was that Mrs. Seaton had no money to leave us, and what effect poverty has on the mind, and what effect wealth has on the mind, and I thought of the queer old gentlemen I had seen that morning with tufts of fur upon their shoulders, and I remembered how if one whistled one of them ran, and I thought of the organ booming in the chapel, and of the shut doors of the library, and I thought how unpleasant it is to be locked out, and I thought how it is worse perhaps to be locked in. And thinking of the safety and prosperity of the one sex and of the poverty and insecurity of the other, and of the effect of tradition and of the lack of tradition upon the mind of a writer, I thought at last that it was time to roll up the crumpled skin of the day with its arguments and its impressions and its anger and its laughter, and cast it into the hedge. 1,000 stars were flashing across the blue wastes of the sky. One seemed alone with an inscrutable society. All human beings were laid asleep, prone, horizontal, dumb. Nobody seemed stirring in the streets of Oxbridge. Even the door of the hotel sprang open at the touch of an invisible hand. Not a boots was sitting up to lie me to bed. It was so late. End of part 6.